Let me present the next keynote, Lars Fordrup, who will talk about professional judgment in the role of research. Lars is leader of the National Center of Childcare and School Research, and you have also done research on a lot of relevant issues, and also in close collaboration with a lot of schools and municipalities. So please welcome Lars, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you. First of all, I have to get out of this. And what should I choose? This one? All right. Thank you, and thank you to Gert for your presentation. I hope we can disagree on some points, but as sort of an opening remark, I find it difficult. But you have to speculate about something to discuss later on. I will, in my 25 minutes, go through 5 questions. First of all, the tradition of professional judgment, because much of what you talked about has a very long tradition. It's not something that we are discussing today. It has played a role since whenever. What's the situation today? I will give another approach to the situation today than you did. What is the role of research? And actually, if I may raise this question, does it work? Does research performed in a certain way, does it actually improve the professional role of teachers? And can we measure that? That might perhaps be a question that we could discuss. And finally, what does this say about what I call the modern educator? So that's my structure, the structure of my presentation. And if you start with quite a long quote, too long to be presented on a PowerPoint, I'm sorry about that. But you may think, and Gert, you may speculate yourself, who actually said so or read this quote. Ask any teacher of the elementary or secondary schools the reason for any particular method or practice, and you'll find him ready with an answer. Less difference in the quality of teaching and greater uniformity in the results than with us are observable. Few teachers will be found who have not a definite object in all of their work, and who do not strive to reach that object in a systematic and methodical way. They have well-situated opinions, both in regard to the object to be reached and the means to be taken to reach it. This is an observation made by an observer, pointing to 3 things, and I think actually almost the same 3 questions that you sort of pointed to or raised before. First of all, what is the objective, or what do we want to achieve? That is one basic question that must be raised and presented by a professional teacher. Secondly, how do we actually realize this objective or this achievement? What is the method? How do we get there? I think you said. And certainly, the reason for choosing one way or not another way, or to change between methods, when something unexpected happens during the lecture. So you also have to be reflective as a professional practitioner. The interesting point is that this quote comes from a book written in 1892 by John Tilton Prince. And I think one thing is different from today. At that time, people from the United States and Canada went to Europe, to Germany in this case, to study how can we find a model for good education. Nowadays, we go the other way. You know, we go to Toronto, Ontario, United States, perhaps Singapore or Finland, etc. But I think the questions remain the same. What do we want to achieve? How do we get there? And how do we actually perform in a reflective way? So I think, you know, the questions that we're discussing about professional judgment are classical questions, and we can find them back in literature. And actually, just to sort of mention where the question of, or the definition, the concept of judgment comes from, you should go back another 100 years to the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who wrote a book about not professional, but about judgment, about the citizen making judgments. Kritik der Urteilskraft, as it's called in German. And also here you can say he points to the fact that making judgments is always a two-way process. You can be, and sometimes you have to be determinative, as he says. You have general knowledge, and you have to try to apply this general knowledge into the practice, into the concrete practice that you are within. But at other times, as he says, the power of judgment is reflective. We are in the midst of the complex situation as teachers, as educators, as pedagogues. How can we actually apply general knowledge into this situation to reflect about what to do, how to choose different strategies, etc. So I think this is the tradition of professional judgment. It's not something that we invented yesterday or 10 years ago. It is sort of basic in the whole discussion about the profession of teachers and educators. Then where are we today? And where you sort of painted a critical or pessimistic picture of where we are, I would say that maybe you are right, but actually as researchers we know better. We know that this direction where we sort of narrow the objectives, where we think or misunderstand that there should be specific ways to achieving specific objectives or goals. As researchers, we should know better, and perhaps we know better. Perhaps we should make our voice better heard in the political space. I would go back to one of my sort of heroes in research, the Nobel Prize winner Herbert Simon. And you, Gert, mentioned the model or the conception of the input-output thinking, that if you do something, something will happen, you know. You talked about pig farming. You could also talk about coffee machines, you know. If you push the right button, black coffee or coffee will milk, or coffee will milk and sugar will come out, sometimes at least. And his point was that you have to make a distinction between what he called natural rationality and social rationality. Because in a very important book, The Theory of the Artificial, which he wrote in the late 1970s, he made this important distinction, that it is a misunderstanding to think that people working in a social context could act according to the conception of natural rationality, that there's a simple causal relationship between what we do and what will happen when we have done what we did. And his point is that that while natural systems act or sometimes act according to simple causalities, the social systems, and I try to illustrate that with this circle, they always, or they work according to conditionalized rationality or causality and reflective causality. So there's not a simple relationship between what you do and what you get out. But still, he says in this book of the theory of the artificial, of course we have objectives, of course we have things we want to achieve, qualifications, subjectification, etc. But going into a classroom is also aiming at doing something together with the students. If we base our understanding on a model like this, first of all, well, we can go to the people like Hattie. They are not always as bad as they are presented. Hattie himself, you know, has emphasized that correlates are not to be confused with the causes, and that it is not the aim to create yet another what works recipe, but to create the basis for intelligent problem solving. So perhaps it's the way he is used rather than, or, well, we can discuss that perhaps, but rather than what he aims at doing himself. He makes the lists of achievements and the relationship between input and achievement, but he also emphasizes very much that this is not a what works recipe. You cannot just take one tool and then reach specific achievements. So again, the idea of Kant of combining general knowledge with a specific situation in a two-direction way is very important. You could also go into the political arena and say that one of the best theoretical arguments against new public management is exactly this understanding that there's a qualitative distinction between natural and social rationality. Because new public management is actually based on the idea that if there are external incentives, you will behave in a certain way, or if you reduce the complexity of what teachers should do, they will be more performative or more efficient. No. According to this model, the model of social causality or social rationality by Herbert Simon, the most important thing to do is to increase the internal capacity of teachers, the professional capacity of teachers, pedagogues, educators, to focus on capacity building. If you want to achieve better schools, better kindergartens, etc., you should put the money into capacity building, not in sort of narrowing the scope, etc. And this has actually been the focus of researchers like Hargreaves and Fullan with the book of Professional Capital, that we should work both with increasing the human capital, individual capacity, social capital, the collective capacity, and decisional capital, professional judgment, because that is also what you said, that it's like playing chess with 100 different people at the same time. You have to make ongoing decisions all the time. They add to this, and I think this is a very important point, that uncertainty is not a problem. Uncertainty is actually the parent of professionalism. But also that uncertainty, which is the case, you know, that's the case, that's the reality of teaching. That's the reality of being a pedagogue in a kindergarten. uncertainty is the enemy of standardization. You cannot solve our problems by standardizing. For example, making, well, we have certain learning objectives or learning outcome ideals, and if we make them even more specific, if we don't have 50 but 100, or not 100 but 500, then we will reach the aim, the goal. No, uncertainty is the enemy of standardization, because standardized situations don't support the practice of professional judgment. And this finally points to the way teachers, pedagogues, educators are organized. And that is what we discuss very much these days in Denmark and in other countries, that the organization of teams should be sort of developed into the organization of professional learning communities, because making professional judgment is not just something that you do by yourself as a lonely writer in the classroom. That's something that you do together with colleagues. You must have time, you must have space, you must have capacity for doing that in the professional learning communities. So what's the role of research in this context? I already quoted John Hattie saying that it's not the aim to create yet another what works recipe, but to create the basis for intelligent problem solving. So we should understand that this is actually the basic role of research. Or with a quote from Robinson and others, it's a misunderstanding to think that best evidence synthesis dictates or can be used to recommend best practice. There are no rules for what is best practice in a given situation, but an insight into the best known evidence-based knowledge is an excellent starting point when we want to find out what is good practice in a specific context. This also means that the relationship between research and practice should be reconsidered, because we cannot just well, you have this example of the lists of practices, and they cost this and that, and they have this and that effect. This is pig farming. This is not teaching. But we can provide elaborated empirical data. We can provide, I think, adapted what works best knowledge, not as a recipe, but as a basis for practice. We can provide feedback functions to teachers and educators, but this has to be done in a dynamic model of production and transfer of knowledge organized by the teachers. When we do it in this way, does it work? Does it have the effects that we aim at? Well, we did so in a project in Norway, and Tone in Kristiansand in the period from 2013 to 2015, where we provided data from the schools and the kindergartens, where we supported or we analyzed the data, where we supported competence development and educational initiatives, and then we repeated the mapping 2 years later in 2015. We did it in this way that we didn't, of course, provided fixed recipes of doing this and that. But as I said before, we provided elaborated empirical data, research knowledge, feedback functions was an important way of acting. And we defined the professional learning communities as problem-defining units, as translation units and recontextualization units, and professional problem-solving units. And then we measured, we did some measurements on that, and for example, we correlated the competence and well-being of the teachers according to themselves, the way they collaborated, teaching-centered, the way they collaborated with a focus on students, and also we had as a control unit maintenance of the school, and then we asked students about their motivation and contribution to teaching. And what we could see is, first of all, that when we worked in this way, with a stronger focus on teaching-centered collaboration and student-centered collaboration, that is, in practicing professional judgment, then the level of there was a strong correlation between that and the feeling of competence and well-being among teachers. But also we could see that there was an evident, clear relationship or correlation between the competence and well-being of teachers, the teaching-centered collaboration, the student-centered collaboration, and students' motivation and contribution. So actually, this way of doing it, not providing recipes, not making very specific objectives of what you aim at, has a clear positive effect. And then finally, the modern educator, and I think I'm back in some of the things that you are focusing on, Gert. If you go back to Merton's classical study of the modern profession, he says there are 3 dimensions of a modern professional teacher. There's a knowing dimension, there's a doing dimension, there's a helping dimension. Of course, as educators, as professional educators, we have to act in a complex context with our experience, with our empathy, with our professional collaboration. We always also have to discuss the question, as I think you mentioned it, what is better, what do we actually want to achieve? And we have to work according to democratically defined objectives for learning, well-being and development of the students. But the third dimension is research-based data and educational knowledge coming from research. And what I've pointed at is, first of all, what is the role of research? It's not the simple one of giving recipes, but to actually strengthen the professional judgment capacity of teachers. And secondly, that in doing so, it's not a top-down model of sending out research and then you can go to the website and find out what to do tomorrow. But we have to be in much closer contact with the practice of teachers and pedagogues. So, thank you.